Hey guys, so the new season of For Honor is upon us, and everything's coming up Egyptian. I know that the season hasn't gotten off to a great start with the conq rework and all, but that doesn't mean that there isn't stuff to at least look at, right? For example, let's talk about the new Egyptian stuff we're seeing, particularly the stuff we're seeing in the map. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not an authority on Egyptian history and culture, but I am a biblical scholar and have studied the Bible very passionately. With that in mind, looking over this new season has been a treat for me, as I'm seeing some very fascinating biblical references here. I'd like to take a few moments here to share what I'm seeing and let you know what parts of biblical history we're seeing in For Honor right now. Now, the first major one that I'm sure many of you have noticed is that it's raining croaking amphibians from the sky in the new map. Frogs raining from the sky is actually a real phenomenon that can happen, believe it or not. If a waterspout or twister goes over a lake or river and picks up fish and frogs into the air, then they can end up falling from the sky, making it appear that it's raining frogs. However, that's not what this is in reference to. The frogs here are actually a reference to the second plague of Egypt, the plague of frogs. I talk about the plagues in great detail in my Prince of Egypt analysis series, which you can see on BitChute, link in the description to the series, but let's also talk about it here briefly. The plague of frogs is mentioned in the book of Exodus, chapter 8, verses 1 through 12, which reads, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Go back to Pharaoh and announce to him, This is what the Lord says, Let my people go so they can worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs across your entire land. The Nile River will swarm with frogs. They will come up out of the river and into your palace, even into your bedroom and onto your bed. They will enter the houses of your officials and your people. They will even jump into your ovens and your kneading bowls. Frogs will jump on you, your people, and all your officials." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, raise the staff in your hand over all the rivers, canals, and ponds of Egypt, and bring up frogs over all the land." So Aaron raised his hand over the waters of Egypt, and frogs came up and covered the whole land. But the magicians were able to do the same thing with their magic. They too caused frogs to come up onto the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and begged, "Plead with the Lord, take the frogs away from me and my people. I will let your people go so they can offer sacrifices to the Lord." "You set the time," Moses replied. "Tell me when you want me to pray for you, your officials, and your people. Then you and your houses will be rid of the frogs. They will remain only in the Nile River." "Do it tomorrow," Pharaoh said. "All right," Moses replied. "It will be as you have said. Then you will know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you in your houses, your officials, and your people. They remain only in the Nile River." So Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's palace, and Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs he had inflicted on Pharaoh. And the Lord did just what Moses had predicted. The frogs in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields all died. The Egyptians piled them into great heaps, and a terrible stench filled the land. But when Pharaoh saw that relief had come, he became stubborn. He refused to listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had predicted. Now, you might think this is a very strange plague. Are frogs really that big of a deal? To the Egyptians, it was. See, each of the plagues of Egypt had a theological implication to them. Frogs were a sacred animal to the Egyptians, a symbol of birth and fertility. The Egyptian goddess Heket had the head of a frog and many amulets and bracelets with frogs on them, which were visible among some of the high priests. It was a crime in ancient Egypt to crush or kill a frog because of what they represented to the Egyptians. So, with that in mind, imagine now frogs covering everything. Frogs all over the land of Egypt, and you can't go anywhere without stepping on one. It's like Moses says in verse 10, "Then you will know that there is no one like the Lord our God," implying that this is not the power of Heket or Pharaoh who has the power of frogs and fertility, but God. And you'll notice that even though the magicians of Pharaoh were able to replicate the plague itself by bringing up frogs, they couldn't get rid of them. That's why Pharaoh needed Moses to do it. It's saying, oh sure, yeah, you can mimic this, but can you undo it? Now in the Bible, the frogs came up from the Nile River, whereas in For Honor, the frogs are raining from the sky, so a different delivery system. Also, and to be frank, the frog plague in For Honor doesn't have the same weight to it as it does in the Bible. Frogs don't have as much meaning to the cultures of For Honor as they do to the ancient Egyptians, and thus, this is just more of an annoyance, I'd say, than anything theologically intense or meaningful. Honestly, if they wanted to go with a real plague that would have upset the people of For Honor, I would have said maybe a plague of locusts. That would have been serious, especially for places like Ashfeld, where grain and stalks and barley are incredibly important, and locusts would eat that up within the hour. But that's not the only plague we see. The frog plague might be just an annoyance, but we've got another one to look at. If you look at the water on riverfront or on the map, you'll see that the water has turned crimson, like blood. This is in reference to a plague, the first of the plagues actually, and one of the most famous. the turning of the Nile to blood, mentioned in Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 through 25, which reads, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is stubborn, and he will refuse to let the people go. So go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes down to the river. Stand on the bank of the Nile and meet him there. Be sure to take along the staff that turned into a snake. Then announce to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to tell you, let my people go so they can worship me in the wilderness. Until now you have refused to listen to him. So this is what the Lord says. I will show you that I am the Lord. Look, I will strike the water of the Nile with this staff in my hand, and the river will turn to blood. The fish in it will die, and the river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink any water from the Nile." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, take your staff and raise your hand over the waters of all of Egypt, all its rivers, canals, ponds, and all the reservoirs. Turn all the water to blood. Everywhere in Egypt the water will turn to blood, even the water stored in wooden bowls and stone pots." So Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. As Pharaoh and all of his officials watched, Aaron raised his staff and struck the water of the Nile. Suddenly the whole river turned to blood. The fish in the river died, and the water became so foul that the Egyptians couldn't drink it. There was blood everywhere throughout the land of Egypt. But again, the magicians of Egypt used their magic, and they too turned water into blood. So Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He refused to listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had predicted. Pharaoh returned to his palace and put the whole thing out of his mind. Then all the Egyptians dug along the riverbank to try to find drinking water, for they couldn't drink the water from the Nile. 7 days passed from the time the Lord struck the Nile. Now, this plague is not only an attack on the gods of Egypt, but it was also a message, an angry piece of vengeance from the Lord. I mean, this plague had layers to it. First of all, when Moses was a baby, the Pharaoh had ordered every Hebrew baby boy to be thrown into the Nile to prevent a potential slave uprising. And that's why Moses is so important, because Moses' mother put him in a basket and floated him down the river to help avoid having to kill Moses, having to throw Moses into the Nile. It's kind of ironic. Moses was floating down a basket in the Nile to avoid being thrown into the Nile. But the point is, turning the water of the Nile to blood was almost God's way of saying, you have filled the Nile with the blood of my children. Now you will drink that blood. But beyond just a symbolic gesture, it was a culturally significant blow to Egypt. The only reason, and I do mean the only reason Egypt was able to exist in the desert was because of the Nile. The Nile could be considered the literal lifeblood of Egypt. Without it, Egypt could not exist where it does. And now, it is blood, and the fish in it are dying, the animals can't drink it, and humans can't go to it to bathe, clean, or drink it. It's a nightmare for Egypt. The thing that keeps them alive, the thing that they require to stay functioning, is now unusable. It's blood. And can you imagine the stench of that too? I mean, it would knock you out. You simply couldn't even go near the river at this point, and that was the point. Even going down to the bank of the river to try to dig up trenches to get fresh water was probably an agonizing experience, because you got to go up to this massive river of literal blood. And according to the last verse, it says it was like this for 7 days.
That you may know the power of the Lord. For 7 days Egypt will thirst.
A whole week of a horrible stench, bloody water, dead fish, very sick animals, and very sick people. It was a nightmare. So now we're seeing this happen in Heathmore. And here, it's more than an irritant. The waters running between Valkenheim and the other lands is now blood, which means any fish or livelihood made from the water is now gone. That means that sailing across it is a difficult experience. Going near the water itself probably just fills you up with an awful, awful stench. There's no fishing to be done. Forget fishing, and that's going to be a struggle for the samurai, who probably have that Japanese culture of really loving their seafood and their sushi and stuff like that. Can't get that now. Fish are covered in blood. It is going to be a nightmarish experience. So this plague itself is probably catastrophic for Heathmore. This is probably much worse than the frog plague. Now, I'm hoping that we'll see more plagues than just this. Some people have told me that they've seen little things buzzing around the map, which makes them think it might be the plague of flies or the plague of locusts. I haven't really seen it that blatantly yet. I'll keep my eye out to see, and if that does come up, I'll talk about that too. But those are the two really big plagues we've seen so far. Now, don't get me wrong. There are 10 plagues total, so we still have the potential for 8 more plagues. Well, actually, I'll probably say 7 more plagues, because are they really going to do the plague of the death of the firstborn? I don't know how they actually do that, but regardless of that fact, So far, I think that's really cool that they're making these references to the biblical plagues of Egypt. I think that it's an interesting reference. I think that they've got some cool ideas here, especially the Bloody River part. I think that's really cleverly done. The frogs, I'll admit, while it's a nice reference, it's not going to be as impactful. I guess it's an issue of divine power. It's kind of like when you see Jormungandr rising out of the water. It's kind of like, oh gosh, this is a very significant moment. But what I think is so funny about this is it's all in reference to Egyptian culture, which is ironic because the plagues of Egypt were not done by the hands of Egyptian gods or deities. They were done by the hands of the Hebrew or Christian God. So it's very interesting that in reference to Egyptian culture, we're showing the power of the Hebrew or Christian God. I just think that's a very interesting point to make there. I thought that I'd share that. Am I saying that this is the Christian God at work? No, of course not. The For Honor devs aren't going to be doing something like that anytime soon, I can guarantee it. Although I think they should. But I thought that y'all might find this interesting. It's a little bit of a tie-in to sort of show you where they're getting these ideas from. I can guarantee you they took some reference from the Prince of Egypt, because in their developer thing, I saw an image of the Prince of Egypt mentioned, so I definitely know that they're taking some reference from that, so I thought that I'd share this to give you all something to talk about. Don't worry, guys, I hear you. I hear what everyone's saying about the new season and how they think it's off to a rocky start, and I 100% agree. It really is. Not a fan of the rework of conq, not a fan of the very lackluster feeling of the season so far. I really hope that they do something soon to fix that. I really mean that. But just because we're off to a bad start doesn't mean that there aren't some good things to look at. I think that this is cool. I like some of the references they make, and I really hope that as the season goes forward, we'll see more stuff like this, maybe some emotes or effects or executions. I really hope that we get to see more. I hope you guys enjoyed this really short video, and I will see you in my next one. Take care.